Painting the orchid flower from life. I'm starting with the drawing of the orchid shape. And then I create the lines of the glass vessel that it's in. And I put a few lines in where I see some shadows and some different shapes within the glass vessel. Adding a few of the internal shapes of the petals so that I know where I want to start changing the values. In the next step, I've already taped down the painting. It gives a nice white border. And then I just turn this flower around because I wanted to have it in the shape and the position that I had when I drew it. So I moisten the center of the flower with enough water that when I add the Aureolin and some of the Cobalt Violet, a pale mix of that creates a nice yellowish center. Moistening the outside, I add some Ultramarine Violet, which I got a little bit more wet than I really wanted here, so I'm softening the bottom edge and adding more color. This is the Janet Rogers this is Janet's Violet Rose, and also I'm adding a little bit of the Ultramarine Violet to that mix. When this dries, it'll be a little lighter than what you see right now because watercolor always lightens. This one I'm putting in some nice juicy wet color. If you add more colors, more paint to the brush, it increases the value. So in watercolor painting, the water to paint ratio creates the value range. More water makes it lighter. More paint makes it darker. Notice that I'm going on the opposite side of the petal, and it's also next to one that is a little drier than the one that I just previously painted. You don't want to go next to the flower that's beside it or the petal, because your paint will bleed into the petal that you already have there, and some of that dark color is going to go into the paint that I'm putting on right now. And underneath this petal there is a shadow, so I'm putting almost pure color underneath there. Has a very little bit of water, probably about a value of, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's probably about a value 3. 3 being darker. Just doing a little bit more painting here of the inside of the flower, where the center of the orchid is I turned it sideways because the petals that I just painted are wet, and I still want to keep it a drier area. I'm using wet paint on dry paper on this area because I want to get more intense color, and I'm also adding some of the lighter violet color, doing a little bit of a blend. Constantly clean my brush because I don't want to carry any of the paint that is on the brush into another color that's already on my palette. This helps keep my palette cleaner and helps prevent getting muddy areas. Muddy areas are made from mixing opposite colors on a color wheel. As long as the paint is still wet, I can put more color in to change the value and increase it or decrease it. If the brush has more water than the paper in the specific area, you'll get a blossom. So I constantly check the moisture by dabbing the brush on the paper towel. The clicking you'll hear in the background is the heat in the electric baseboard heat. And I'm sorry for that annoying sound, but that's what it is. After I've increased the values where I'm happy with the petal colors, I start putting some color in where the stem goes down into the glass, Aureolin yellow and some cobalt blue. Makes a pale bluish green. I'm taking some of the Ultramarine Violet and a light mix of that and putting it down as the shadow area. You bring some of the color from the flower above down in there so that everything's kind of more cohesive. And this one, I originally drew those lines. I did not make my area wet enough around the outside. So now what I'm doing is trying to soften that outside area, which I'll go back in and add a little bit more color. I've elevated my painting so that some of the water will run into the areas that I'm trying to add more color to, just increasing the values a little. So I bring in my original palette, the one that my Old Faithful that I use all the time, because this has more colors on than I can choose from, and so I choose from an assortment of ultramarine blue, cobalt blue. I also have new gamboge on this palette, raw sienna. I also have, I believe, a little bit of the a very dark purple, which right now I don't remember the name of it, but in the description I'll be able to put the name of the paint that I use. having adjusted the values of the petals, I'm preparing to put in the final touches of the detailing of the flower. Using very, very fine brush. It's a DaVinci Maestro. It's a Kolinsky Sable, and it's a number 2 brush that I'm using to put in the details. I also want to say that I did a second painting of this after I finished this first one. I did another one and I sat it inside a ramiken glass and painted it, so you'll see that at the end where I have both of them. And the flower actually came from a restaurant when we went out to eat, and it was on our plate, or my husband's and my plate, and I decided to bring it home and do a painting of it. But also, you know that orchids are edible. More detailing, strengthening the value, increasing the values. Anyway, the orchid petals are edible, but the bulb I don't believe is. And this is my impression of the cymbidium orchid. This is the second painting, showing it inside the ramiken glass. And you'll see both paintings.